Hey everybody, back with yet another Duel Commander deck tech. This time it's going to be a black, green, blue control deck, more commonly known as Sultai or Bug. And this time we've got Leovold Emissary of Trest as the commander. And Leovold is a powerhouse that has been making waves in Legacy as of recent, so if a card is doing well in Legacy, it's probably good enough for other formats as well. There hasn't really been a bug commander in control colors since the banning of Tasigur, and for good reason on the banning of Tasigur, because Delve was kind of just breaking the command tag system, which inherently is bad for the format. But that's besides the point. Let's go over Leovold here real quick. For black, green, blue, you get a 3/3 Elf Advisor with two abilities. The first is each opponent can't draw more than one card each turn. So that inherently is going to have advantage against most typically blue decks that are trying to use cards like Ponder and Preordain to manipulate the top of their deck to try to draw specific cards for given situations. They're not going to be able to do that. It also is insanely powerful against brainstorm type effects like Jace and obviously Jace the Mind Sculptor and obviously brainstorm itself. They're going to draw 0 from it if they're playing it during their own turn, and they're going to have to put 2 cards back, and that's just obviously insane. So if your opponents forget about that, it's going to be really good. But the ability that really puts Leovold over the top, whenever you or a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or an ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. So that comes up so often. Your opponent tries to targets you with a discard spell or a burn spell, you're going to get to draw a card. Your opponent tries to kill one of your creatures, you're going to get to draw a card. Your opponent does something as simple as wastelands you with Leovold in play, you're going to get to draw a card. It is important to note that if a spell targets more than one of your creatures at the same time, you will only draw one card. However, uh, if a spell targets you and a creature at the same time, as is the case with, for example, Searing Blaze, you will draw 2 cards. So opponent tries to electrolyze 2 of your creatures, you're drawing 1 card. Opponent tries to Searing Blaze you and a creature you control, you're drawing 2. That's important to note. It will come up occasionally, so keep that in mind while you're playing. There's not a whole lot more to be said about Leovold other than he is very powerful and very disruptive to what your opponents are going to be doing. As always, we'll move on to the creatures next. First of all, we have Baleful Strix. For blue-black, you get a 1/1 bird with flying and death touch, and the ability when Baleful Strix enters the battlefield, draw a card. This is basically just a blue-black staple. Almost every deck that plays blue and black plays Baleful Strix. It's got flying, so it's going to block just about everything in the format. It has Death Touch, so it will trade with whatever it blocks, and it draws a card. So it's just a good classic 2-for-1 card that occasionally the 1/1 body will be relevant for pressuring planeswalkers and the like. It's just very good, and it's just classically a control card value till the end. It's important to note that it's an artifact, so it can get killed by the likes of Reclamation Sage and things like that. Next is Deathrite Shaman. I think there's basically 2 ways you can build Leovold. You can go very heavy on the mana creatures and play the deck more mid-range style, or you can play more on the control axis and not really play a ton of mana dorks. Uh, the exception to that is Deathrite Shaman, who is just an exceptional card all around, castable off either black or green mana. You get a 1/2 with 3 different abilities. The first is exile target land from a graveyard, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So that's nice, just an additional mana source. Pay black, tap, exile target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard. Each opponent loses 2 life. That's nice against things like Snapcaster Mage, uh, Jace Vryn's Prodigy, Torrential Gearhulk, and just it can kill your opponent flat out. And then green, tap, exile target creature card from a graveyard. You gain 2 life. That's also nice, a little bit of extra life gain in the deck, and obviously some more graveyard hate. That's just a very efficient card that should basically, again, be in all black-green decks, even if you're not super heavy on the Dork plan. Next is Eternal Witness. For 1 green, you get a 2/1 human shaman with the ability when Eternal Witness enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. This is kind of like a green Snapcaster Mage in this particular deck. You're just getting back an interactive spell most of the time, but don't forget you can get back lands if you need to make another land drop. You can get back planeswalkers or enchantments, etc. It's just very good, and one of the upsides is you can get back a spell that you know you will want, but you aren't forced to cast it immediately, like in the case of Snapcaster Mage. Next, we have Grave Titan. For 4 black, you get a 6/6 giant with Death Touch, and whenever Grave Titan enters the battlefield or attacks, put 2/2/2 black zombie creature tokens onto the battlefield. Originally, this list had Primeval Titan in it because the lands were a very good way to win the game with Leovold in play, but I think a more traditional route of just trying to play a single card that kills them all by itself is a better plan. And Grave Titan has an insanely fast clock. It attacks for 10 the first turn and 14 the next, and anything beyond that and your opponent's probably very dead, but it also creates an army immediately, so it's good at blocking as well. Next, we have Jace Vryn's Prodigy. For 1 and a blue, you get a legendary creature, Human Wizard. It's an 0/2, and it has tap, draw a card, then discard a card. If there are 5 or more cards in your graveyard, exile Jace Vryn's Prodigy, then return him to the battlefield, transformed under his owner's control. On the flip side, you have 5 Loyalty Planeswalker, whose plus is up to 1 target creature gets -2/-0 until your next turn, so it protects itself a little bit, or protects you. -3, the main reason you're playing the card, you may cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard this turn. If that card would be put into a graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So essentially, you get to flash back a card. It's very good with the discard spells in the deck. You can really pick your opponent's hand apart. And obviously, removal and wraths, not so good with counter magic because it's basically only at sorcery speed. And then -9 is you get an emblem with whenever you cast a spell, target opponent puts the top 5 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. It's a realistic ultimate to get to, 4 turns of only plussing, but it's not a reliable win condition with Eldrazi running around in the format, and you shouldn't be looking to play any Planeswalker for their ultimate ability. It's mostly just about that minus for some additional interaction with your opponent and the plus to protect you a little bit. Next, we have a card that's very similar, Snapcaster Mage. For 1 blue, you get a Human Wizard 2/1 with Flash. When Snapcaster Mage enters the battlefield, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. Excellent with cheap interaction, which this deck has a ton of. Good with cheap counterspells, good with cheap removal, discard, card manipulation, etc. Next, we have Tasker the Golden Fang. For 5 black, you get a 4/5 legendary creature human shaman with the Delve ability, so you can exile any number of cards while you cast Tasker to pay for his colorless mana cost. Then for 2 hybrid blue-green, Put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard, then return a non-land card of an opponent's choice from your graveyard to your hand. That's just classic card advantage on the activated ability. Very often 1 mana, and you get to kind of control what you're going to be able to get back with the ability by exiling what you do not want back. So it's just a good threat. You can often play it plus another spell in the same turn, and that's very good. Next we have Thragtusk for 4 green, creature, beast, 5/3. When Thragtusk enters the battlefield, you gain 5 life. When Thragtusk leaves the battlefield, put a 3/3 green beast token onto the battlefield. It's just a piece of much needed life gain in the deck, and it's a resilient threat too. True Name Nemesis for 1 blue. When True Name Nemesis enters as True Name Nemesis enters the battlefield, choose a player. True Name Nemesis has protection from the chosen color. Very, very powerful card. Blocks for you all day and then skates past defenders and can check planeswalkers or eventually kill your opponent. Vendilion Click, Flash, Flying, Fairy Wizard 3/1 for 1 blue. When Vendilion Click enters the battlefield, look at target player's hand. You may choose a non-land card from it. If you do, that player reveals the chosen card, puts it on the bottom of his or her library, then draws a card. Sweet interaction with Vendilion Click in this deck. If Leovold is in play and you Vendilion Click your opponent, you get to take a card, reveal it, put it on the bottom of their library, and then if you do it traditionally in the draw step, they will have already drawn a card for the turn and do not get to get a card from Vendilion Click's ability, and that's just sweet. You can also obviously use it to cycle cards from your hand that are not good in the given situation. And then we have Venser Shaper Savant, who is a flash 2/2 for 2 blue. When Venser Shaper Savant enters the battlefield, return target spell or permanent to its owner's hand. So you can bounce a problem permanent and try to counter it on the way back down. You can bounce uncounterable spells to delay things for a turn, or you can just protect one of your own creatures by bouncing it or something. Just a very, very versatile card that's honestly good in just about every blue deck. Next, we'll go over the sorceries. We have Ancestral Visions, which suspends for a single blue. So at your upkeep, you'll remove a time counter, or when you remove the last one, you may cast it. It says target player draws 3 cards. So it's just a very powerful card that suspended early is going to get you 3 cards later on and will really allow you to grind for card advantage. Next, we have Collective Brutality for 1 and a black, and Escalate, which is its cost is discarding a card, and you can pay this cost for each mode that you choose beyond the first. And the modes are target opponent reveals his or her hand. You may choose an instant or sorcery card from it. That player discards that card. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn, and target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So just very, very powerful. It's Duress at 2 mana, which is obviously more expensive, but it's a lot more versatile. It can kill a creature, or in a pinch, it can gain you some life, or maybe kill an opponent. Pretty often, I think you're going to use this as just the Duress mode, but against aggressive decks, you'll pretty often be Duressing plus killing a creature, or killing a creature plus gaining 2 life if you need the life. Next is Damnation, just the classic Black Wrath, 2 black, destroy all creatures, they can't be regenerated. Next we have Demonic Tutor for 1 and a black. It allows you to search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Very powerful tutor. Obviously it increases the mana cost of whatever you're getting by 2, so it's not super efficient, but it allows you to go and get the best card in a given situation. Pretty often, you're going to be tutoring for a wrath or a counter spell, but you can also tutor for a threat or a threat to win the game with. Next we have Duress, which for single black is target opponent reveals his or her hand. You may choose a non-creature, non-land card from it. That player discards that card. Just good solid hand disruption. Innocent Blood for a black. Each player sacrifices a creature. So we have a couple creatures in the deck, 12, which is a little bit on the high side for most Leovold decks. But I think pretty often that this card is going to be an early piece of removal on turns 1 and 2, possibly 3. And then later on, if you're having to cast this, it's probably going to kill, hopefully, like for example, in the Geist matchup, you're going to be able to use your targeted removal on other things and then Innocent Blood away the Geist, and it might kill one of your creatures, but that's probably okay if you're killing the Geist. And most of the time, I think that it's just going to be cheap early removal. Next is Inquisition of Kozilek. For black, target player reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-land card from it with converted mana cost 3 or less. That player discards that card. Next is another Wrath, Languish, 2 black black. All creatures get -4/-4 until end of turn. It's a pretty solid Wrath. It's going to kill just about everything in the format of relevance, but there are going to be some bigger things that you can't kill, so keep that in mind. If you're having to tutor with Demonic Tutor, for example, and Languish is going to do the job, it's going to kill everything that you need, tutor for that instead of, say, Damnation, because the Damnation will kill everything that you need to kill. Next is just a catch-all, 1 black-green for Maelstrom Pulse, destroy target non-land permanent and all other permanents with the same name as that permanent. So it's great at clearing away tokens, but obviously you can just get rid of anything that you're having trouble with. Ponder for a single blue, look at the top 3 cards of your library, you may then put them back in any order. You may shuffle your library, draw a card. Just a classic library manipulation that cantrips. And moving on to something very similar, Preordain, scry 2, then draw a card. Very similar, they allow you to dig for important cards and grab the best card for a given situation. Thoughtseize for a single black, target player reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card. You lose 2 life. The quintessential 1 mana discard spell. Just gets rid of any non-land that you really don't want to deal with. Next is Toxic Deluge for 2 black. As an additional cost of Toxic Deluge, pay X life. All creatures get -X until end of turn. Another just good, solid Wrath. It may not be necessary anymore with the printing of the next card I'm about to talk about, but I still like having a fair amount of Wraths in the deck because they are a good solid way of gaining card advantage in the deck. Next is Yahini's Expertise for 2 black black. All creatures get -3/-3 until end of turn. You may cast a card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. So the ideal situation with Yahini's Expertise is Wrath the board, cast a discard spell to follow it up with, cast a piece of card draw, cast a cheap creature, cast Liliana of the Veil, etc. So just in practice, it can be extremely powerful. Next, we'll talk about the instance. Abrupt Decay, very similar to Maelstrom Pulse. For a black-green, you get an instant. Abrupt Decay can't be countered by spells or abilities. Destroy target non-land card with converted mana cost 3 or less. Just very solid targeted removal that deals with anything that costs 3 or less. Brainstorm for a single blue, draw 3 cards, and put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. There's not a whole lot to be said here. You get to very often draw 3 cards, put back your 2 worst, and then use a shuffle effect to get rid of those cards so that you aren't forced to draw them again, and you essentially drew 3 brand new cards for a single blue. Very powerful. Condescend, X blue, counter target spell unless its controller pays X, and Scry 2. So very often it's a cheap counter spell in the early game, but it does scale into the later game if you need to counter something bigger, given that you have enough mana. Counter spell for blue blue, counter target spell. just the classic counter spell, very powerful hard counter. Cryptic Command for 1 blue, blue, blue. You get to choose 2, counter target spell, return target permanent to its owner's hand, tap all creatures your opponents control, draw a card. It's kind of hard on the mana to get triple blue sometimes, but in this kind of deck, I think you can afford it, and the modes are obviously very powerful. You can just stall for a turn by tapping all your opponent's creatures and drawing a card. You can use the most common mode, which is counter target spell, draw a card, but it has many, many uses and could take a whole video just talking about it. Next is Daze for 1 and a blue, counter target spell unless its controller pays 1, but it has an optional cost of returning an island you control to its owner's hand rather than paying Daze's mana cost. So you can tap out in the early game, for example, casting your Leovold, and then you can hold Daze back up to protect your Leovold, disrupt what your opponent's doing. Just a very solid early game card. Devour Flesh for 1 black, you get an instant. Target player sacrifices a creature, then gains life equal to that creature's toughness. Very good edict effect. Uh, Oftentimes, you just don't care about what the opponent's life total is. You'll kill them eventually. And this is the second best edict in the game in terms of instant speed ones, and it's important that it's instant speed in this deck because it allows you to tutor for it. Next is Diabolic Edict. For 1 black, you get the same card. Target player sacrifices a creature, just this time they aren't gaining any life from it. Disfigure for a single black, target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. Good, solid, cheap early game removal. Most often used to kill mana creatures. Dismember, 1 Phyrexian black, which means that you can pay the Phyrexian black mana with 2 life or a black mana, and it says Dismember says target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn. Very solid removal, often kills everything in the format. Very versatile mana cost, can cost 1, 2, or 3. It's just a great card. Evasive action for 1 and a blue. Domain, counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 for each basic land type among lands you control. Almost always it's going to be a mana leak, but generally at its worst it will be a miscalculation. Just another solid early game counterspell in the deck. Fact or Fiction for 3 blue, reveal the top 5 cards of your library. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles. Put 1 pile into your hand, the other into your graveyard. Fantastic instant speed card advantage. Fatal Push for a black, destroy target creature if it has converted mana cost 2 or less. Revolt, destroy that creature if it has converted mana cost 4 or less instead if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn. So most often that's going to be via cracking a fetch land or something along those lines. But sometimes you'll kill, someone will kill one of your creatures and then you'll be able to Fatal Push and kill theirs. Most often I think it's going to be just another effective figure in the deck, but it obviously does have more upside overall. Force of Will, 3 blue blue, counter target spell, has an alternate cost of paying 1 life and exiling a blue card from your hand rather than paying Force of Will's mana cost. So another card very similar to Daze can just protect you when your shields are down. Force Spike for a single blue counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. Very solid piece of 1 mana interaction. Obviously it does not scale well as the game goes on, but most of the time you're going to be able to cast this early on, and people don't play around Force Spike as often as you would think later on in the game, so it still can occasionally snag cards there as well. Go for the Throat for 1 and a black, destroy target non-artifact creature. Very solid 2 mana removal. Hero's Downfall, 1 black black, destroy target creature or planeswalker. Not super efficient, but mostly this is in the deck because it can kill a planeswalker as well as a creature, and you can tutor it up if you need to. Impulse for 1 and a blue, look at the top 4 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Good, solid library card draw manipulation style card that allows you to just dig 4 deep and grab whatever you want. Into the Royal for 1 and a blue with a kicker of an additional 1 and a blue. If you choose to pay the kicker, it's going to draw you a card, but otherwise it just returns target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So most of the time you're going to be hoping to cast it with the kicker to make up for the inherent card disadvantage of bounce style effects, but you can just bounce things that you hope to counter on the way back down. You can protect some of your own permanents with it. It's just very solid. Next is Mana Leak. Very similar to Evasive Action, just 1 blue counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. Good solid early game counter spell. Memory Lapse for 1 and a blue counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, put it on top of its owner's library instead of into that player's graveyard. Very solid counter spell. It allows you to force your opponent to draw a card they necessarily don't want to draw again, and it's just very, very good. Miscalculation for 1 and a blue, counter target spell unless its caster pays an additional 2 colorless mana. So early game counter spell, and then later on in the game, if it's dead, you can pay 2 colorless mana and cycle it. So you discard it and trade it in for a new card off the top of your library. Murderous Cut for 4 black with Delve, so again you can exile cards from your graveyard to pay for the colorless mana in this spell's cost, and destroy target creature, so just another piece of cheap interaction later on in the game. Mystic Confluence, 3 blue blue, you may choose 3 modes, and you can pick the same mode more than once. As counter target spell unless its controller pays 3, return target creature to its owner's hand, draw a card. This card's insanely versatile. It can just draw you cards, it can bounce creatures to protect you for a turn, it can counter a spell and draw some cards. It just does a ton, it's super versatile. Mystical Teachings for 3 blue, you got an instant that says search your library for an instant card or a card with flash, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So this is kind of why we're playing some cards in the deck that are a little bit on the less efficient side. For example, Go for the Throat. But this card is very powerful. It allows you to search up a cheap interaction piece on turn 5 and cast it. Example, you can tutor up your Fatal Push and immediately cast it. You can do the same with Force Spike. And Disfigure. You can just tutor up a piece of cheap interaction and cast it immediately, get the perfect card for any given situation. And also, it tutors up Vendilion Click if you need like a threat or some hand disruption, and it can tutor up Snapcaster Mage for some value. It also has Flashback, so you can cast it twice, so it's card advantage. It's a very expensive card advantage, but it is card advantage. And it's just a very powerful card. It obviously has a steep mana cost, so keep that in mind. But the card is very good. Next we have Negate, which is just a hard counter for 1 blue, counter target non-creature spell. Then Remand for 1 blue, counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, put it into its owner's hand instead of into that player's graveyard, draw a card. Very, very good card, very similar to Memory Lapse in what it does, but it also has the additional mode of if you're fighting a counter fight over a very important card, you can remand your own spell to effectively counter your opponent's counter spell. You get to draw a card and you get to take another go at recasting your spell. So don't forget about that mode on the card, it's very powerful. Then we have Smother for 1 and a black, destroy target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less. It can't be regenerated. So another piece of early game interaction, but it also kills stuff later on in the game, primarily opponents' commanders. There are a ton of commanders that cost less than 3. Janara, Leovold, Zergo, Rada, Heir to Keld, Vile Smasher, Rayhan, Last of the Abzan, Akiri. There's just a ton in the format, and this is going to be relevant at basically all points. Spell Pierce for a single blue, counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2. Another piece of early interaction. It's great for fighting counter spells in the early game. Just very good. and then Spell Snare for a single blue counter target spell with converted mana cost 2. It's one of the all-time best cards for Breaking Serve on the draw. You can counter a 2 converted mana cost spell on turn 1 on the draw, and all of a sudden you're back in the driver's seat. It's just very, very good. It's obviously super narrow, so it will be dead sometimes, but it is very powerful when it does work. Jace the Mind Sculptor, 2 blue blue, 3 loyalty Planeswalker, whose +2 is look at the top card of target player's library. You may put that card on the bottom of that player's library. 0, draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. -1, return target creature to its owner's hand. -12, exile all cards from target player's library. Then that player shuffles his or her hand into his or her library. Just a very powerful Planeswalker. You're primarily going to be using the 0 ability on this card just to draw cards for card advantage, but you can obviously -1 to protect the Planeswalker or you, and the +2 can be used to keep your opponent off of a specific card. You can scry on your own with it, uh, and the ultimate is obviously game winning, though typically not relevant. Next, we have Liliana the Veil. For 1 black black, you get a 3 loyalty Planeswalker with +1. Each player discards a card. -2, target player sacrifices a creature. -6, separate all permanents target players controls into 2 piles. That player sacrifices all permanents in the pile of his or her choice. Primarily, this is going to be able to come down on turn 3 and make your opponent sacrifice a creature, tick up, make both players discard a card, and then edict the opponent again. But against control, you can really pressure their hand with the +1, and if they let this card get out of control, you'll be able to minus and really destroy their mana base usually. Just a very powerful Planeswalker that's very cheap. The only enchantment in the deck, Pernicious Deed. For 1 black green, you get an enchantment with the ability pay X, sacrifice Pernicious Deed, destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with converted mana cost X or less. So popping it for 0 can clear out a wave of Titania tokens, and then other than that, you get a pay X Wrath at instant speed. The mana base is pretty straightforward. We've got the 3 original duels, Bayou, Tropical Island, Underground Sea. We've got the 9 requisite fetches, Bloodstained Mire, Flooded Strand, Marsh Flats, Misty Rainforest, Polluted Delta, Scalding Tarn, Verdant Catacombs, Windswept Heath, Wooded Foothills. We've got the 3 Fastlands, Blooming Marsh, Botanical Sanctum, Dark Slick Shores. We've got the 3 Shocks, Breeding Pool, Overgrown Tomb, and Watery Grave. We've got the 3 Painlands. We've got Yavimaya Coast, Underground River, and we are actually not playing Llanowar Waste, so only 2 Painlands. And then we've got we've got Command Tower, obviously. We've got the Buddy Lands of Drowned Catacomb, Hinterland Harbor, and Woodland Cemetery. And then beyond that, we've got 4 basic lands, 2 islands, 2 swamps, 1 forest. Then we have a Twilight Mire, a Sunken Hollow as an additional blue-black vegetable land. Typically, this will come into play tapped. We've got the 3 temples. We've got an Urborg, and we've got some utility lands. We've got Bojuka Bog, which is going to enter the battlefield tap and exile all cards from target player's graveyard. Good, solid graveyard disruption on a land. We've got Cavern of Souls, which is going to allow you to resolve an important threat. I think generally you'll be naming Elf to push through your commander, but also Deathrite Shaman. I don't believe there are any other elves in the deck. Correct. You can obviously name Wizard as well, pushes through Vincer, um, Vendilion Click, Snapcaster, Jace. You can name Human to resolve Deathrite, Shaman, Jace, Snapcaster, Tasigur, and Venser. So those are the overlaps there. Cephalid Coliseum and Gaia Reach Sanitarium. These are two cards in the deck that are going to allow you to lock your opponent out of the game. And what I mean by that is once you grind your opponent down to Hellbent or basically Hellbent, you can use Gaia Reach Sanitarium in their upkeep while they have no cards in hand. They'll immediately draw a card for Gaia Reach Sanitarium. They'll discard it. They'll have no opportunity to cast it unless it's a Madness card. And then they'll skip their draw step because they can only draw one card each turn. Cephalid Coliseum is going to allow you to make target player draw 3 cards, then discard 3 cards for blue and tap if you control 7 or more cards in your graveyard. So you can use this on yourself to cycle 3 cards, or you can use it on your opponent to just make them discard 3 cards, which is sweet. We have Creeping Tar Pit, which is a come into play tap blue-black dual land that for 1 blue-black becomes a 3/2 blue-black elemental creature that's unblockable. And we have Wasteland, which is tap, sack, destroy target non-basic land. And that's basically the mana base. We have 41 lands because the deck typically does not have trouble with card advantage. You'll lose more games to not having the correct amount of mana than anything else. So playing a few extra lands in here because of that. And so matchups for this deck, I think anything that your counter spells are going to be very good against and removal is going to be good against, you're going to have a positive matchup. But you're also going to have a commander that really, really disrupts a lot of decks, so you'll get a lot of wins from Leovold himself. I've noticed the deck struggles with the mono red matchup because the deck is just very fast. Hopefully, my recent changes, the adding of Disfigure, Smother, Fatal Push, an additional Wrath, hopefully those cards will help the matchup some. If it doesn't, I'll look to add a little bit more spot removal. You don't want to play too much, otherwise you'll be in awkward situations against creature light decks, and then perhaps another card that is dedicated to life gain. Not sure what that will be off the top of my head, but we'll find out if it comes to it. I think this deck is very good, and if you enjoy playing a classic Drago style deck, you should look into this deck. Uh, that's it. Thanks for watching.